Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and adults, because for the most part, it's probably adults that mainly watch this show. Welcome to the Memorial Day weekend fun episode here of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. As you can tell by the episode title, it's freaking May, guys. And May is almost done, and it's almost freaking June. We are almost to the 6th month of the year. God, it feels like the Super Bowl was only weeks ago. Actually, no, I'm kind of lying. The Super Bowl really does feel like a long time ago. It's the draft that feels closer, and even then, it still feels so far away. And what else feels so far away? The beginning of the NFL season. The dog days of summer here at the Sports Agents of Chaos have begun. Aside from the shining sun, as you can tell, it takes away half of my face on a weekly basis on this show. It also forces us here to try to get creative on the program, and we're going to be trying to do that. Although the NFL blessed us here, boys. I feel like I'm going to constantly say this whenever we get a nugget of news. The NFL did bless us this week, so we do have something to talk about here on the program. But before we continue with that, I have to introduce my compatriots of chaos, as always. First, joining me here on the top row of the screen, my man Justin, the master of games here. Zucker. Justin, how we doing?
Doing well. Counting down.
Counting down to the start of the season, to
pretty much.
All right, good. Counting down. Clearly, what Justin's really counting down to internally, ladies and gentlemen, is our eventual division breakdowns that we'll do just like last season. We will do that again. Similar format. What order will we do it? We absolutely have no idea. We're just going to do it on the fly. Speaking of doing things on the fly, the master of both pre-prepared skits on this show and doing stuff on the fly, mainly to surprise Justin and I, the podfather himself, Rick, or as podfather Judas, as he will now be known as at times. Rick, how are we doing this week?
Good morning, gentlemen, or afternoon, gentlemen. Yeah, we're having some fun here. I think it's always fun to talk to a little football in May, and if you'll forgive me a little bit, there's some construction going on in the background here at the house. We're building an outdoor bar in the backyard of this establishment, and unfortunately, I think the construction hit a piping somewhere. So my world went a little bit further back in time to the 1970s.
No, don't start busting move. No. Oh my God, the people are not ready, Rick. The people are not ready. Oh my God. In an alternate timeline, if Rick was born like 40 years ago and he grew up in the 70s, that's 100% what his hair would look like. Genetics be damned.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I won a 70s night costume contest last night, so I figured I'd just pull out the
I was gonna say, is there something to do with something, or we're just graced with this appearance?
I mean, you know, I've always wanted to look like Sonny Bono before the skiing accident, so you know, I figured why not.
Well, while Sonny Judas over there looks like that. First off, wait, what did you get for winning? Is it that like it can't be the chain around your neck, is it? Is it?
Oh no, it's this lovely lion chain around the neck right here. Did you see that?
Wow,
it's pretty. No, I actually won the right to advance the next week's 80s night costume contest. So, you know, yeah.
I can only imagine what Rick is going to look like next week, because you know, if he at least podiums, Justin, he's going to have it on to start the show next week.
I think at this point we're required to see it no matter what.
Yeah, right.
Listen, that's fair. I think that's very fair.
If Rick, by chance, if you end up missing next week because you need to travel out to I don't know, Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan to maybe make peace with that country. I don't know where we're at with our international relations with Azerbaijan, but if you do need to travel next week, if you're going to submit videos for us, you need to do it in the 80s costume. That's locked in. Can't be anything else.
Well, no, actually, my plan next week is to go to Bayside, California to hang with Zach Morris and the gang and, get some inspiration from them, you know. So, yeah.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Oh, God. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as the podfather is dressed up like that, that's how you know, God, A, it's freaking May, and B, well, that just filled up some airtime for us, so we're very thankful for that and what we're going to talk about. But, of course, like I said, the NFL did bless us this week. One of the notable names that we spoke about before the draft, during free agency, before the draft, after the draft, that could be moved, will be on a new team. We just have absolutely no idea what the new team is yet because he didn't get traded. He got cut, ladies and gentlemen. DeAndre Hopkins, who was released by the Cardinals. We're going to do a full deep dive into that discussion later on in the show, just a couple of moments. We're going to talk about the release of the Cardinals, how things went from good at first to Cliff Kingsbury, which is the equivalent of bad on the scale of good to bad in terms of Arizona, and then So basically, what happened there, the case with him being released, and now where he could go. DeAndre Hopkins kind of made it sort of obvious. Was he foreshadowing? Was he foreshadowing on the podcast that he was on earlier this week? Who knows? All I know is that maybe next time we need to try to get an NFL player on the show, and maybe they'll go on a new successful team. But we can only hope that we get a first guest that good. Yeah, no, probably not. Anyways, before we get to that, we have our usual fun and games as always, because the tagline of the show, fun, football, chaos. Although Rick has already started the chaos with how he's dressed. But let's go into a little bit more fun here. Rick, you have a mind-blowing fact of the week. I wonder if it's 70s related, considering the costume.
Actually, you know what? It's not, but it does have. It is something kind of funky in a way, if you will, to kind of keep up with the jive here. Nearly 180 years ago, gentlemen, the country's 7th commander-in-chief, Andrew Jackson, passed away. He was buried on June 8th of 1845 due to unknown complications. And there was a funeral that was had in his honor. And, you know, it's one of those things where at funerals, you know, you usually have a lot of reverence and a lot of, somber feelings and somber moods. Well, funnily enough, Andrew Jackson's funeral was heckled. There was a entity that heckled Andrew Jackson's funeral and got so disturbed it started swearing up a storm. And so basically, this was one of the most horrible things of the 1800s. And as I'm sure you know, people were aghast, agog. Oh my stars was muttered a few times, I believe, because, you know, the 1850s, that's how things go here. And this heckler had to be moved back into the White House where it needed to calm down. Now, this heckler was someone who was actually very close and dear to Andrew Jackson by way of Andrew Jackson's wife, Rachel, who passed away in 1828. It was a friend of Rachel's who was very dear to her. And when Rachel died, this friend became closer to Andrew Jackson, who was known to have a very specific foul temper and foul mouth, a sailor mouth, if you will. Unfortunately, it rubbed off on the friend, and that's why at Andrew Jackson's funeral, the friend decided to swear up a storm and heckle. And I have a quote here from the reverend who presided at the funeral. Before the sermon, and while the crowd was gathering, a wicked parrot that was a household pet got excited and commenced swearing so loud and long as to disturb the people and had to be carried from the house. Yes, Andrew Jackson had a pet parrot, a pet gray parrot named Pole, and this parrot decided to take up its master's linguistics and swear up a storm, causing a nonsensical riot at Andrew Jackson's funeral. We don't know anything of what the parrot actually said because, 1840s, they only gave you the story of what happened, not the transcript. But I can only imagine that, like today says, it's freaking May, but I can imagine there was other words that were thrown out there, not the word that we've seen in our title. But yes, Andrew Jackson's funeral, my friends, was heckled by his parrot, Pole, the African gray parrot.
How did you stumble upon this? Because no, here's the thing. I very much like going down a rabbit hole every once in a while when it comes to the internet, right? One day I was on LaMarcus Aldridge's Wikipedia page because it was the day he retired, right? Like once again officially. So I was on his Wikipedia page. I was just going through everything, and then somehow, some way, I like by hook or by crook, I ended up on the Hartford Athletics page. For the one semi-pro team that we have here in Hartford, Connecticut. Although shout out to the Hartford Wolfpack, great playoff run. So I understand going down a rabbit hole on the internet. What the hell rabbit hole did you go down to find that?
Do you want the fun answer or the simple answer? Or I can give you both.
Justin, you make the choice.
I just can't believe that we just sat here speaking about Andrew Jackson's parrot while Rick is dressed like that.
NFL show, ladies and gentlemen.
My day.
You never know with chaos, my friends.
This is not how I thought I would spend my day.
Well, you never know. So the fun fact that starts off a little sad, actually. My wife and our family, we actually had to bury somebody recently very close and dear to our hearts. And actually, at that funeral in the cemetery, we were all meandering around, finding like the rest of the family that are there. And I stumbled across, just a random tombstone. And there was a gentleman who walked past me, and he said to me, "Seems like a nice funeral you guys had." I said, "Yeah, it was nice. She was 91, so we put, And he said, "Oh, it seemed a lot better than Andrew Jackson's funeral." I said, the hell are you talking about? He said, go look it up. And he walked away from me. So
this random man contributed to the program.
yes, this random man contributed to the program. That is the long-winded answer. The short-winded answer also is that I found it underneath the Snapple cap.
Of course.
Yes. But I like the long-winded answer a lot better, to be honest with you, because
So do I. Well, the question is, did you plug the show? Did you let this guy know, hey, you're gonna find this out and say it on a podcast?
Well, no, because I had no idea. I thought he was just a loony. He looked like a disheveled. He looked like a guy that didn't know what a laptop was. To be honest with you, he looked like one of those guys who just wanders the cemeteries. Just like waiting for a plot to fall into himself. So
He's one of those cemetery wanderers.
Yeah, And listen. I will say this: if you do wander a cemetery, it's great calisthenics because that's a big cemetery you're wandering around. Very sad, but very quiet. So
got the cardio.
I'll get mine elsewhere. Yeah,
get the cardio. Yeah.
I was gonna say not how I'm personally gonna get my cardio later on today,
Well,
but you know what? Beggars can't be choosers, I guess.
Hey, I'm going to a wedding tonight, just like this. So I'm gonna get my cardio in on the dance floor, doing some of those busted moves. So
I don't know. Are you actually going dressed as that?
No, my wife would kill me. I have an actual suit and tie combination. So
what a shame.
I know it's the worst. But
I don't think he'd be allowed on the premises if he was going as that.
No, I feel like, well, it's a DJ, it's not a band. So if it was a band, I feel like I would have to get up there and do some numbers with the band in this whole outfit. Yeah.
Oh my god.
They might be like, why are you wearing sweatpants and not have anything on your feet? But we love the top of you, so just come on, do Disco Inferno with us.
That's
cool.
That's how it goes. I'm not gonna lie to you. When you started the Andrew Jackson story, and as you were going into it, Rick, I thought you were gonna say, but before you said it was an animal, I thought you were gonna say, and by chance it was interrupted by a rant podium by my ancestor. Like I thought that's where we were gonna go. That old great grandpappy Rosetto was the one that interrupted Andrew Jackson's funeral, and that's where the rant podium really began. I was gonna say we have a 200-year lineage of the rant podium.
You really made me want to go back and research that because there definitely was at some Neolithic period. The first ever rant podium was on the cave paintings in France. Yeah. We have to go back and research that, but that'll be for our 100th episode. I need about 40 episodes of research for that, and 2 episodes of drinking.
Oh, okay. Well, that right there, that's what hooks the people right there. If you want in the future the Rosetto family lineage of, I'm sure in some way, shape, or form, it's going to lead to what Rick is doing nowadays, which I can only imagine how his ancestors feel about the getup. We move on, ladies and gentlemen, to some of our games. We continue with the fun. Justin, what do we have here to start? Is it trivia? Is it would you rather? What are you hitting at us today?
Just trivia today.
All right, let's do it.
All right. As per Pro Football Reference, who has the most career rush yards per attempt or yards per rushing attempt? Minimum 750 attempts.
Most career yards per rushing attempt.
Well, let's think about this for a minute here, Jerk. I think the advent of the running quarterback has definitely made this a more interesting avenue to discuss because I feel like when you talk about rushing attempts and you talk about, many yards per, you're looking for a guy who doesn't rush the ball a whole lot. And as Justin said, minimum 750. So clearly we're not talking about a running back because a running back gets maybe 400 a year, probably, maybe 500 a year.
That's just the minimum standards as per.
Well, of course. But what I'm saying is that a guy like a Mercury Morris or a Jim Brown, who were the bell cow backs for a very long time, are probably going to be guys that are not going to feature as highly on this list, simply because of the fact that since they were the guys that were running the ball constantly, they're probably the numbers. They might have a lot of rushing yards, but they're not going to have the same average because they have a lot of attempts too. So
I definitely see your point. I'm just trying to think because the running quarterback is still relatively new, and like the top 2 or 3 guys in terms of rushing QBs, have they hit 750 in their career? Do you think is the only thing I'm wondering?
It's not as new as you would think, because I got a name I'm thinking of already.
Really? Okay.
Randall Cunningham.
Oh, dang. Okay, that's a good one.
Because again, I mean, yeah, it definitely, I think the whole running quarterback thing kind of started with him back in the 80s, and he lasted for a very long time. Even when played with Minnesota back when he, couldn't run as well as he used to, but he still could run with the ball.
Mm.
So
So before we lock that in as the first guess, are you going to be dressing as Randall Cunningham for your 80s costume next week?
no.
The best Randall Cunningham outfit, and you're going to be dripped out in that. That's what it's going to be, right?
No, I think I'm going to go as Teen Wolf actually.
Mm.
Yeah. It's gonna require a lot of contouring and a lot of fur, but we'll get there.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
Rick's first guess. I'm trying to imagine it now. Rick's first guess, ladies and gentlemen, for this trivia. Justin, how close is he with Randall Cunningham?
Randall Cunningham from 1985 to 2001 averaged 6.4 yards per attempt, number 2 on our list.
Ooh.
Okay. Well, let's think about the lineage then, because I'm still in the running quarterback category, unless you think there's a running back who might be better off on this list.
I can't. No one I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. So let's think about the lineage of quarterbacks that could run. So before everybody else, there was a Randall Cunningham, and then who would be the next running quarterback that you would think of?
The next one I would think of immediately would be Michael Vick. Like he was the guy for basically all three of us growing up. He was the guy before unmitigated unfortunate circumstances off the field happened.
I thought you were going to say AKA Danger Russ was a member of the team.
No, never.
Yeah.
Mike Vick would be the next one, and then after him, see, this is why I wonder about the rushing attempts thing, because I just don't think Cam stayed healthy enough. But at the peak of his powers, Cam would run the ball a lot, but I just don't think he hit 750 attempts in his career. Is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think you got to factor in injuries with guys like Cam Newton and Russell Wilson later on. But I can't really recall Michael Vick having that many significant injuries. The dogfighting thing obviously took him out of a lot of the football, but when he came back, he was still the same running quarterback.
Yeah, he had a couple of good seasons in Philly ultimately before things ultimately turn south.
Yeah.
We need to. I don't know if this will be for this offseason. Maybe it could be. Maybe it'll be maybe next offseason for us. But in terms of, we need to do team introspections of just interesting teams. We got to do a team introspection of that Philly team that Vince Young called the dream team and then completely floundered out that season.
Well, yeah. I mean, Vince Young calling anybody anything positive is
very true.
A gateway to LSD and bad times.
Very true, but I would be interested to try to look back at that team, just the offseason they had, what went into the regular season, because think about it, that's Michael Vick at quarterback, that's Deshaun Jackson still there. I think Jeremy Maclin was still there, if I'm not mistaken. So you had pretty good wide receiving room. You had a still pretty stout defense there. They signed, I think, that offseason, Nnamdi Asomugha. That Eagles team was a favorite to a lot of people, and they completely fell apart. And was that not Andy Reid's final season in Philly too?
The Nnamdi Asomugha one was a killer.
Yeah,
he got all that money, and then said, "You heard the Shady McCoy story?"
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. When Nnamdi Asomugha gets torched by Brett Selleck.
Oh yeah, terrible. Well, keep in mind too that was also. I think getting rid of Andy Reid was the worst thing they did, because then they got Chip Kelly, and we saw how that worked out. Or
didn't work out. Super Bowl at the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, but that wasn't Chip Kelly's doing.
He hasn't been gone that long. No, of course not. It doesn't always work out immediately after.
Chip Kelly's trash.
It was a short fall.
I think we could all agree with that. All right. Well, as we plan future episodes here, ladies and gentlemen, let me submit my first answer. Michael Vick.
Michael Vick. From 2001 to 2015, averaged 7 yards per attempt. He is number 1 on the list. There were only 3 quarterbacks in the top 10. You guys named the top 2. The third one on the list at 4 was Russell Wilson.
Boo.
Yes, the rest were all running backs and 1 fullback.
Who's the 1 fullback?
Marion Motley.
Oh, That's just an amazing.
That's even before my time. 70s,
46
me.
to
It's even before my
55.
time. Yeah.
He was a fullback and a linebacker.
Of
Gotta
course.
love those two-way players back in the day.
Right, corner slash receiver, linebacker slash fullback slash
Quarterback
God knows.
slash punter.
You want to take a swipe at the number one running back?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Since you guys got the first two guesses.
He's a little bitter. Active player, Justin, or not active player?
He's not currently active.
Rick, I have to wonder, do you think Jim Brown is somewhere on this list?
I think he is. But I don't know if he's the top running back on this list.
Mhm.
But I think he's definitely on this list in some capacity.
The top active player is currently tied with Jim Brown.
Really?
There you go.
At
There you
sixth.
go. You know who I think it is? It's a guy who didn't have a long career. I mean, he did, but didn't have a long career, but was definitely an option because this team, before they became the juggernaut that we know of, was a pretty heavy running-based team. Which actually, I have two guesses there in that mind. Either Priest Holmes or Jamal Charles.
Ooh. Oh my God, Jamal Charles.
Yeah.
Both the shots.
Oh, what a throwback.
Jamal Charles was a phenomenal running back.
That is
And-
the definition of injuries,
got
just
injured.
taking
Yeah.
away a career.
Yep. And Priest was good towards the end, but I think there were too many seasons at the beginning where he just wasn't good enough. But he was very good towards the end. So I think Jamal Charles is the answer.
Jamal Charles at 5 averaged 5.4 yards per attempt in a 10-year span of 2008 to 2018.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, if it wasn't for the injuries, he would be just such a good player.
It's him and Eric Berry are ironically both Kansas City Chiefs players who,
Yeah.
if you look at the last 15 years, guys who's and I know Eric Berry, it wasn't like, yes, there was also other things aside from physical injuries, but I remember there was a season where Eric Berry tore his ACL, if I'm not mistaken, and he missed time. But I think that the next year, the year after, he came back and he made All-Pro. Like Eric Berry and Jamal Charles, the Chiefs were a good team. Like they've had good talent for a while.
They were a good team, yeah.
God, could you imagine? Like obviously, he came in much later for both those guys, but could you imagine somehow if you could just plop in a prime, healthy Jamal Charles and Eric Berry on this Kansas City Chiefs team?
Oh,
They might win every Super Bowl.
yes, sir. They absolutely would.
It's exactly what they need to.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yep,
my God.
nope, that's accurate.
You know what? NFL fans should be happy. Everyone in the AFC West should be happy. We haven't figured out time travel yet because I promise you, the Kansas City Chiefs would bring back both of those guys. They would just change both of their names.
Well, y'all haven't figured out time travel yet.
Ah, yes. I apologize there. I apologize. What was I going to say?
Oh, Andy Reid, good to see you. How you doing?
I was going to say, Justin, is Barry Sanders somewhere on that list?
Barry Sanders, let's see. He is tied for 11th with Cam Newton, Gale Sayers, and Joe Perry.
Oh, Gale Sayers.
Yes, and the
Chicago Bears.
active running back with the most yards per attempt, currently tied with Jim Brown, the current Cleveland Browns running back, Nick Chubb. 5.2 yards per carry, per attempt. Not per
Look at that.
You know who might also ascend this list a little further if and when he gets healthier? Jonathan Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor's tied for 8th.
Oh,
Yeah.
is he?
Aaron Jones and Mercury Morris.
It's all about-
Hey,
Nice. It's all about efficiency with running backs now. If you're a running back and you can't consistently rip off 4, 5, 6 yard chunks, you're not gonna. You'll get some playing time, but you're not going to get a lot of playing time. Like the running game has very much changed to where back then 3 yards was acceptable. Nowadays 3 yards is a below average carry. It just is. At least in my mind. At least in my mind, it is.
No, I definitely agree with that.
Have we named the top running back yet on that list or no?
Well, Chubb was right.
Chubb was
No,
active.
Charles was the top running back. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
Charles was the top running back.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure. Covered all of our bases there. Very good job, per usual. Not surprised because Justin is the games master here for a reason. Thank you very much, Justin, as always. All right, we've had the fun. We've already had plenty of chaos in there. We had football, actually, but despite the fact of Andrew Jackson funerals and parrots and all that, shebang. Let's get to some hardcore football talk, boys. this will be the main topic for this week. And maybe we'll talk plenty about this. Maybe it'll lead to some light discussion at the end in terms of other big names, because we've heard for a while now this offseason, big names potentially on the move. Will this maybe set something where we see another name or two get cut like this? Who knows? But ladies and gentlemen, to the meat and potatoes of the show, DeAndre Hopkins, multi-time All-Pro receiver, multi-time Pro Bowl receiver, one of the best wide receivers of the last decade in the NFL, very much easily so, cut by the Arizona Cardinals. We heard about rumors. I think we were predicting this since middle end of last season, that DeAndre Hopkins was probably not long for his career in a Cardinals uniform, and that it was ultimately going to get to this point at the end where he would no longer be on the team. And you look at his career just in general with Arizona. Of course, obviously, there's the issues with the Houston Texans that ultimately lead to his departure, because a man who I like to call Billy O'Stooge was there, and he ultimately said, DeAndre Hopkins, nah, don't want you anymore. Don't need you. And he goes. 2020 was his first season with the Cardinals. He made a second-team All-Pro in his debut season with the club, and also made the Pro Bowl team there. So pretty good season with the Cardinals overall in 2020. 1,407 yards, 115 catches, which tied a career high, and 6 tutties. But ever since then, it has just been it's been rough times for him. Sort of for the Cards, they did have the one good season in 2021, but then obviously came way back down to earth in 2022. But ever since that 2020 banger of a first good season, only 10 games played in 2021 and 9 games played last season in 2022, which of course has coincided with what has been a tough offseason, putting it lightly, for the Arizona Cardinals. They did have a pretty solid draft overall by all our standards. I think we could all agree that they had a really good draft, especially setting themselves up for what could be an even better draft for the next season. But Kyler Murray being out, of course, I don't think there's still a definitive timeline. I don't think we'll get a truly accurate one until we get closer to the season. But we're all assuming he misses at minimum half the season, probably will miss the entire year. You hire a new head coach because you have to fire the old one because the old one was bad at his job. Your general manager steps down from his position, so you have to hire a new general manager. And all in all, you lost a good amount of talent. J.J. Watt retired. Zach Allen, I believe, is his name, left the team. He signed with the Broncos. Just a lot of just guys leaving this team, a lot of talent going away. And it's setting up for a rough season in Arizona, to say the very least, boys. But before we go on the whole outlook thing, DeAndre Hopkins overall, obviously not the way that he thought the Cardinals' tenure was going to end, obviously, especially with how good 2021 was. Cardinals fans obviously had their hopes up. Justin, I'm going to throw it over to you first. Obviously, the cut happens for a reason. We were kind of discussing it in our chat, where even with the Cardinals, they agreed to take the massive cap hit this year with cutting him in order so that he wouldn't necessarily be on the books next season. We could probably assume he was going to do something similar. They were going to do something similar if they had been able to trade him, but obviously no takers there. What do you make of just generally DeAndre Hopkins being cut by the Cardinals and them not being able to find a trade partner for him?
Well, it's indicative of how much money he was owed. He was owed, I think it would end up being, if he hit all his incentives, $30 million this year, which is an astronomical number among receivers. He was going to be the highest paid receiver this year, as he probably should have been. He deserved, I don't know, he had an okay season last year. I know he missed 7 games or 6 games or however many it was, but it became more financially viable for them to start the rebuild now. They'll make a determination on Kyler Murray's knee at some point during the season, and they'll see, hey, look, we're going to have a new coaching staff. We have a new GM. We're going all brand new, and Hop wasn't going to be here for the long run anyway. So if you couldn't get anything to trade because no teams were taking on his cap number, the best thing is to make sure you're off the books the following year, and that's what they did by cutting him now.
Rick, I assume very much the same thing. And you also go talking about that for the Cardinals. You talk about other teams, in sports in general. Like when we get news, like some people, like it's not as instantaneous as we think. This has been in the works for a while. We've been hearing for months now that a DeAndre Hopkins exodus from Arizona was on the horizon. We just didn't know how ultimately it was going to end. And now this comes. Obviously, Rick, it was made very clear that teams, they saw the situation and they said, we're not going to trade for him because we know you're just going to cut bait at some point.
Well, the thing with that too is that they couldn't designate DeAndre Hopkins as a post-June 1 assignment. You mentioned J.J. Watt. Teams are only allowed 2 of those post-June 1st designations for assignment, basically, on the NFL. J.J. Watt was the first one. And then Rodney Hudson, their starting center at the beginning of the season, who missed the last 12 games due to injury, was their other one that they released back in March. So the Cardinals were basically praying for a trade partner that would never come. So, yeah, they're eating about $22 million in cap space on this end. I think, too, something to be cognizant about as well with DeAndre Hopkins is that back in his first year with the Cardinals, he had 115 catches for 1,400 yards. He basically did the same thing over the next 2 seasons combined. Whereas last year, he played 9 games, and I think the numbers were 64 and 717. And the year before, in 10 games, he had 42 and 542. So the production with the injuries and with the suspension due to the PEDs was kind of lower. But he would have been a guy I would have built this team around because, Arizona needs a lot of help. This is not going to be a good year for the Cardinals, especially on the start. And yeah, it doesn't help too when you're DeAndre Hopkins and you're on the Cardinals, and the Cardinals see you've listed 5 quarterbacks who you want to play with, and none of them are Kyler Murray. So it gives you no hope for having him stick around. I think, it was no surprise to anyone that he didn't list David Blau or Clayton Tune in there as well, because, why?
No love to Colt McCoy at all.
No love to Colt McCoy or Jeff Driscoll either. So, yeah, I mean, it creates an interesting little conundrum here because now, in a sense, you've got teams that are going to line up for him. But my question is, if you're DeAndre Hopkins and you had that $20 million basically there, what are you going to ask these teams for? I mean, you basically got nothing to show for. There's no contract. So are you going to ask Green Bay, who's got Jordan Love, to fork over $17 million a year? Are you going to ask the Jets to fork over $14 or $15 million a year? It creates a very interesting dichotomy here where it's almost that number is almost a poison pill in a way, where is it too much money? And DeAndre's a great receiver, no question about it, but is it too much money when you already have your idea set as to what your team's going to look like, and then this just happens to fall into your lap? It's a very interesting question that I think teams now have to address on their cap because of this newfound monetary gain they might have if they bring DeAndre Hopkins into the fold.
And just one last thing to note about DeAndre Hopkins, 30 years old as of now, will turn 31 in a little over a week's time. So pre-happy birthday, D-Hop.
Hey.
But like you mentioned, Rick, tough last season, mainly due to the suspension. But still, like you said, in 9 games played, 717 yards. If you give him back for those 6 games, it would have been pretty good. So there's still plenty. I think there's still plenty to look at with Hopkins. And considering the fact that he is being cut and they're still going to have to pay him out, I could personally see a world where D-Hop just takes a 1-year deal this season as kind of the Cardinals have to pay me. Like the Cardinals have to pay him his money.
Of course.
So he could easily just take a 1-year deal to reset things for himself, go to the new team that he's going to sign with, because I wouldn't be shocked if even while we're still talking, he gets signed, because he is that type of talent. But most likely it'll probably be next week where we're going to discuss that in terms of the new team that he'll be going to, assuming this doesn't drag out for too long. But just one last thing before we get to the more specific parts of this for DeAndre Hopkins, just real quick on the Arizona Cardinals, boys. It was a couple weeks ago because we did our quarterback rankings last week, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to hear that, please check back last week's episode. But before that one, we had an episode where we did a segment of, it may be early, but, and we did a lot of things for next NFL season, how it's still early on, of course. We haven't seen, for the most part, we've seen 99% of the offseason go by. This is the last little 1-2%. But now in terms of the Cardinals, where at least even for a little bit, with DeAndre Hopkins there, it wasn't going to be a game changer for you. It's not like it would have helped you win 6 games, but having that type of talent there would have at least helped whatever semblance of quarterbacking they would have tried to do. Does him leave? I don't want to make it sound like they lose him and they're going to be the worst team in the league definitively, but it's not looking good. Are the Cardinals just looking more and more like they're going to be the number 1 overall pick for the 2024 draft? Because
well, keep in mind also, that's probably what they want, because they also own Houston's pick too.
I was going to say, they've never been more likely. There's never been a team more likely to have the first number one
Absolutely.
pick, because they have the 2 teams that right now are favored to have the top 2 picks.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I think too. You look at every positional ranking that they have, and if you were to stack their number 1 guy on the depth chart against every other team's number 1 guy on their depth chart, probably going to say they're going to finish 32nd in a lot of those categories.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of teams you would take their number 2 receiver over their number 1.
I mean,
Buda Baker also.
yeah, exactly. They use Buda Baker as well, and it's a mass exodus. I mean, I feel bad for guys like James Conner who are there trying to still kick it. And then all the rookies that they got that are going there, Michael Wilson from Stanford, Amari DiMercato, the running back from TCU, they're going to be going to basically a JUCO team at this point with no shot of anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's never been a more presumptive number 1 pick than the Arizona Cardinals. And there's never been a more presumptive number 2 pick than the Arizona Cardinals, I'd say as well, too. So, yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. Oh, poor Coach Gannon. He might get Wilkes, boys. I'm just saying that right now. He might get Steve Wilkes because this is not going to be a pretty season, to say the very least. You know those Seahawks predictions we were making last year, Rick? I think we might need to bring those back for the Cardinals, and it might actually be accurate this time.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm not going to start riding the Colt McCoy Arizona Cardinals Ring of Honor bandwagon here just for that particular reason. That ain't happening.
Okay, well, they don't have Geno Smith, and I won't lose any sleep if Colt McCoy and anyone on that Cardinals quarterback room doesn't.
The only way the Cardinals can be good is if they coach Larry Fitzgerald out of retirement. That ain't happening.
What is he going to play? Quarterback, receiver, and defensive back?
Yes. Larry, do everything. Go.
Well, I mean, he basically had to do that. He basically had to do that in his career when he was there. Wasn't that more tackles than drop passes or whatever the heck it was?
Yeah, something like that, I think. Yeah.
Just utterly absurd. Larry
incredible
Fitzgerald.
Player.
What a legend, robbed of not being able to win a Super Bowl because that goddamn franchise is cursed. Anyways, so moving on from the Cardinals and the likely number 1 and number 2 overall pick next season for them, which, hey, what a reset that you get there, but you're going to need more than that. Let's move on to the DeAndre Hopkins aspect of things here, boys, more in particular. We talked about what the situation is with him, going on 31 years old, still pretty good. Again, had a good season last year. If you project his stats over a full 17-game season, he played 9 games. So if you sort of double his stats, maybe shave off a little bit with the yards, he finishes well over 1,300 yards, which is still really good for a wide receiver for him as well. So, as on his recent appearance on the I Am Athlete podcast, DeAndre Hopkins listed 5 quarterbacks he'd most like to catch passes from, just in general speaking. Who knew probably at that point he was probably talking about this next year as well. So let me list those 5 quarterbacks here. We'll kind of go in order for those teams as well. So let's start with this is I don't know if this is the order he said it, but this is the order listed in the list that I have. So let's go, from top down. So let's start with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. So we're going to go one team at a time here based off of the quarterbacks that D-Hop talked about wanting to go to. And also he talked about the team situation of wanting stable management, of wanting a really good defense, especially a really good pass rush there, etc. So let's start with the Bills in this essence. You have a lot of what he's asking for. You have the talented quarterback in Josh Allen. You have a wide receiving room with more talent there, with a Stephon Diggs, with a Gabe Davis, who all in all didn't really have the season I think a lot of people would have hoped for after his playoff game now 2 seasons ago where he had 4 touchdowns in a single game. But you have a pretty good wide receiver room, so he's not going to be the only option there. You have a good defense there for the most part. Bills did lose a little bit in the offseason, but that's still going to be what most would assume is a top 10, maybe not top 10, top 12 at minimum defense in the league. Stable management with what they have built there in Buffalo, stable coaching as well. So a pretty good situation there with Buffalo. Justin, I'll throw it to you. DeAndre Hopkins to the Buffalo Bills. Talk about the concept of that.
I hope not. Look, it's Josh Allen is a prolific deep ball thrower, and DeAndre Hopkins is a prolific deep ball catcher. I mean, I'm sure Buffalo very much remembers that loss 2 years ago in Arizona where D-Hop caught that Hail Mary over 3 defenders to lose the game. To win the game for the Cardinals, rather. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be an excellent fit for them. They could definitely use the depth at receiver. I'm curious to see if it would push Diggs to the 2 or it would keep Hopkins put Hopkins at the 2. Obviously, Gabe Davis would move down, but they also do not have a ton of cap space. So I know, as Jurg would say, the cap space is a contract, but you still got to make it work somehow. So it depends on who they would be able to move around and how they free up money.
Yeah,
but it would certainly be an interesting in terms of football. I don't want to, be biased here, but in terms of football, it would absolutely be an excellent move for them.
It would be. And that is part of why I mentioned the idea earlier of with the Cardinals cutting him, like one thing we need to remember about sports, and while the NFL, obviously it's not fully guaranteed deals such as like Major League Baseball, but DeAndre Hopkins is still going to get a good chunk of change from the Cardinals cutting him. He still had guaranteed money left on that deal. So he's going to get some money. That's why I mentioned the idea before. The most likely situation, I think, he's probably just going to have to take a 1-year deal this year and then push for a 2 to 3 year deal next offseason. It will probably be the last deal of his career. We'd assume. Rick, Hopkins to the Buffalo Bills. Let me back up for 1 second. Obviously, we look at all 5 teams we're about to list. We would say, yes, DeAndre Hopkins, of course, he would want to go there. Of course, they would probably want him there. But more from Justin's perspective of would it work out? Because we always fantasize, get this guy, like just build up a goddamn super team. But, on paper, Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins sounds incredible. But would it work out the way we think it should is the question. So that being said, and that to kind of keep in mind as we go team by team here, what are your thoughts on Hopkins to the Bills, Rick?
I don't think this one works out the way that everyone's talking about. I think that if you bring DeAndre Hopkins into that wide receiver room, you're going to create a little more tension at the top between him and Diggs. This is basically Stephon Diggs' team from a wide receiver perspective. And I think Justin's right. I think that the cap space is a little questionable for me. It's a very good fit, but it's not the answer for DeAndre Hopkins because I don't believe that this is a team that's going to be okay with taking on a 31-year-old on a 1-year deal who wants to push for 2 or 3 because, and here's the sidebar. It's nice that somebody cares about what the rest of the team looks like. DeAndre Hopkins wants a good pass rush. Well, that's nice, but does Buffalo have the best pass rush of the 5 teams that we have there? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'd also venture to say it gives DeAndre Hopkins more work to do against a stronger division if he goes to Buffalo because the Jets, Sauce Gardner's going to be on him like crazy. The Dolphins, Xavier Howard's going to be on him like crazy. And the Patriots are the Patriots. So, who knows who they're going to put on there. But I think that I understand
Christian Gonzalez, Rick. Christian
Gonzalez or who was the guy that killed the Jets last year? Marcus Jones, I think was his name, the corner, the punt return corner, something like that. I think that it's a pipe dream in this scenario because I don't see it being the answer. I think that it's a nice idea to catch passes from a guy who could throw the ball all over the field. But I think this would be, if we had to rank this one, I think this would be my number 5 because I think this is just not, it's not an ideal spot, I think. And I don't think it's
not a need.
It's not a need. It is.
Offense wasn't the issue last year. It was turnovers.
Right.
And it was their secondary was rough. And then their defense did not come through in clutch time.
Let me tell you, if DeAndre Hopkins was a running back, I would say Buffalo absolutely go get him because you do not have a running back. You have plenty of wide receivers. This is a luxury. This is not, and that's the thing is that a guy who's a number 1 who goes to a team that's viewed as a luxury is going to feel taken advantage of and is going to feel like a guy who wants the ball all the time. And it just ain't going to work out that way. Josh Allen's not going to find you 15 times in a game. That's just not how it works. So I think this would be a great fit because it would be another weapon, but it's not what they need.
Yeah. And that's part of what you need to consider when, guys are free agents. Heck, we still have a couple decent free agents out there that have yet to find teams. And people are like, well, why are these talents not there? You can't just look at the talent. You have to look at the scheme and the fit. And that's why I brought it up before you went, because look, DeAndre Hopkins will make sense on all these teams, and it'll be great wide receiver rooms wherever he goes here. But I think you mentioned it, Rick. It's with a Stephon Diggs type talent there already. Can these offenses master the fact that they're going to have to spread the wealth? And again, if you're DeAndre Hopkins, you're going to a team, depending on the type of deal you signed, which again, I'm assuming, I would think maybe logically it could be a 1-year deal. Maybe he is able to get a 2-3 year deal out of someone. But if we maybe go down the logic that it's just going to be a 1-year deal, if you're Hopkins, you want to rebuild yourself, do the Buffalo Bills truly give you the best chance to rebuild yourself to try to get 1 more 3-year deal next offseason if you sign there for a year? And I don't know about that necessarily.
The best way I can describe it too is like if you're playing a video game, let's say, and you're building up a roster, you want to have a roster that is diversified because you want to have a lot of different guys who would take up a lot of different avenues. If you have Stephon Diggs, who let's call him a playmaker, for example, let's just call him that, and then you add DeAndre Hopkins, who's a playmaker, you're a little heavy on one side of the ball versus adding specialists, in the video game world, adding support, adding bruisers, and that sort of thing. So it makes you heavy-handed on one side, and we saw that with Buffalo this year. They were heavy-handed on one side, forgot about taking care of everything else, and look what happened to them against Cincinnati. They were trucked with a T and an R, Justin.
Trucked indeed, and no, Isaiah McKenzie, it would not have mattered if it was in a dome or not. You guys were still getting whooped that game. Anyways, moving on from that.
But anything would make it easier for the other team too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like people just assume if you make conditions easier, only one team benefits. It's really weird. Anyways, and also they play in Cincinnati, goddamn Ohio. They only just got an indoor practice facility recently. If you've heard the Pat McAfee show, you know that a million times. Like, you act like the Bengals haven't played in practice in snow, goddamn it. Joe Burrow's from Ohio. Anyways, yeah, moving on from that, Joe Burrow reigns supreme over Josh Allen. Anyways, to the second team here on the list in the order of as I was reading. Rick, I'll throw this one to you first. The Philadelphia Eagles and Jalen Hurts. Now, again, similar thing. Great team all around. You got the quarterback there. You got the young quarterback who just got paid a very healthy contract, mind you. You have a stable offense there, stable coaching staff, stable. Maybe you could argue the most stable. I mean, yeah, I would maybe argue the most stable management core of all these teams, with Howie Roseman being there. And the defense in and of itself, even though they did lose a couple of pieces, they certainly made some gains in the offseason still and in the draft. So good situation there. But again, kind of a similar thing. And now you have it doubled up to where not only is A.J. Brown there, it's Devontae Smith is there and Dallas Goedert as well. So granted, Dawson Knox was on the Bills, but irregardless, you have even more stacked wide receiver room there. So, Rick, if the Bills were your number 5, if we're making an order here, at least for you, do the Eagles rank that much higher, or are they your number 4?
I'm going to say this in one sentence because I only have one thing to say about this. Hopkins didn't go to Georgia. He's out.
He doesn't have the Kirby Smart seal of approval.
Doesn't have the Kirby Smart seal of approval. He's done. He's out. No, it's a similar scenario. It's buoyed by the fact that Philadelphia is stronger overall than Buffalo. So yeah, that's why they'd be ahead of Buffalo in this scenario. But let's put it like this. If you take DeAndre Hopkins and put him on a roster with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, like you mentioned, and their running back room, where is he on the depth chart? I get it. He'd be number 1 or 2 based upon, legacy and based upon, career. But in all actuality, this team runs well the way that it does on offense. Adding another wrinkle into that offense is not going to make it run any better. It's going to add another hitch to the way that you work. And so there's no reason to throw DeAndre Hopkins into this mixture. I get it. Again, Jalen Hurts was a great quarterback last year. He had a really, really good season, but he had a really good season with the weapons that he had. This is not adding a guy that's a difference maker. This is adding a piece to an already stacked room that you don't need. It's a luxury the same way Buffalo is a luxury. But the difference is, again, Philadelphia is a much more complete team than Buffalo is, I think. So that's why I would rank them higher, but I still don't think it's the right answer for him. And again, what they do in the draft, Georgia. You think they could go for a Clemson guy? They remember. They remember what happened to the Tigers. They remember that. So, no.
Never forget the Tigers.
The North remembers.
They're not the North. Okay, anyways. Justin, I saw a slight bit of head shaking there. What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, you're telling me that wide receiver room wouldn't be better with DeAndre Hopkins in it? There's not a single wide receiver room in the entire NFL that wouldn't be better by adding DeAndre Hopkins. They might have top receivers for sure, but just the presence of DeAndre Hopkins would help the Eagles do what they want to do, and that's run the ball. Because just having that extra guy on the field, you put three receivers of that caliber on the field, there's no way you can stack the box. It's impossible. I don't care what down it is. You have to have someone back there because at any moment, Jalen Hurts could pull that ball back and just throw it over the top. And you have DeAndre Hopkins on one side, A.J. Brown on the other side, and Devontae Smith somewhere because he also gets open down the field. How are you gonna play defense against that?
You don't.
Now, that being said, I agree. It's not something they need. It's not going to make them better. It makes them more annoying. It makes them more difficult to deal with. But they're already arguably the best team in the league at the moment. It's one of those things where the rich get richer, which they somehow seem to do at every turn. But it doesn't make them a better team, because how can you be better than arguably being the best team?
Again, I'm looking at looking at DeAndre Hopkins and saying, you're still 31, you're still in the prime of your career. You want to be a top
Absolutely.
target. You want to be a top
And he will
target.
not be in Philly. He
No.
might be, but he's not. He's not going to see the percentage share that he saw in Arizona.
Right. It's like if you tell Jimmy Butler, go join a super team, he'll say, no, I want to be on my own, man. So, I want to lead my own team. That's I think the DeAndre Hopkins mold, is that he doesn't want to be a compiler on a team that's already stacked. Look at his career trajectory. Houston and Arizona, he was the main guy there. He was the option there. That's what he's used to, and I think that's still what he can do. If he was 34 or 35, I would say, yeah, let's put him in a role, like a spot role. But this is still a guy who's still a number one target, I think. And so we'll command number one target money. And that's the thing, too. Philadelphia, you gave all that money to Jalen Hurts. You know that sooner or later you're going to have to give this money to Devontae Smith. Do you want it to be a battle between a younger Smith and an older Hopkins? Because
we know who wins that.
Exactly. So
I think cap space is an issue here, too, if I'm not mistaken.
I agree.
Yeah. Cap space on paper is an issue before they eventually pay all these guys, and they're somehow able to subvert the cap because some of this money is going to the Caribbean islands or whatever. Anyways, next team on the list. I'm just saying, man, salary cap is a social construct.
I'm gonna buy a boat and call it the salary cap now because
they could call him $8 to $10 million. They can give him $8 to $10 million and actually have some room on the salary cap.
It's pretty good. That for just for a year. Like, assuming we go for
got about $12 to $15 million.
Pretty good, if you ask me. So yeah. And I mean, well, we should also probably assume that the Eagles, they went shopping at the deadline this past year. If there's one thing I know about, high volume shoppers, boys, is that they're going to go out window shopping again. So maybe they're saving that cap space for, week 7, 8 of this next season. All right, next guy on the list. This is where I think, again, all these teams you would go to, all these teams would make sense, all these teams quarterback. But now, we were talking about the fit, the idea of it. This could be, I'm really interested to see where they'll rank on Rick's list. But I'm going to throw it over to you first, Justin. The Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. You're talking about the best quarterback in the league by far. The hat trick sweep last week in our QB ranking. Spoiler, I think nobody should be surprised that Patrick Mahomes is number one. And I think every single quarterback ranking list for the next 3 seasons will have Patrick Mahomes as the number one quarterback on the list. And Kansas City, you start to have a little bit of a different conversation compared to the other teams we have. Now, maybe the defense isn't in theory as strong in totality-wise compared to the other two, but you still have a defense that stepped up when it mattered most. You have a beast in the interior in Chris Jones. You have a young George Karlaftis who could maybe take that step next season. You got some young guys on that defense who are looking to make an impact still. And then you go to the offensive side of the ball, good offensive line for the quarterback, the best quarterback in the goddamn league. And while Travis Kelce's there, yes, so maybe he still wouldn't be the, in theory, number one option. You include the other skill positions. If you just talk about wide receivers, you got a lot of young guys there. You got Sky Moore, who they're hoping can break out in year 2. You got Kadarius Toney, who you just recently brought into the fold at last year's deadline, who contributed heavily, mainly in the Super Bowl. So we need to see what a full Kansas City Chiefs season will look like out of Toney. There could be the potential that DeAndre Hopkins could solidify himself as the number one just wide receiver in the room. Obviously, probably number 2 target, again, when you consider Travis Kelce. But the number one wide receiver, this is probably, I think this and one other team are the most open for him to be the number one guy there in that skill position. But again, Justin, I want to go to you first. DeAndre Hopkins to the Kansas City Chiefs. Why should we all be praying that that doesn't happen? Because there'll be a Super Bowl again.
I mean, it would certainly improve their skill position room. I mean, it's weird. For a team that's been so dominant, they really haven't had a ton of weapons outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. I mean, their running game has always fallen short of expectations. Their number 2 and 3 receivers never really blossomed there. They've kind of struggled to bring in guys after Tyreek and Travis Kelce. So to bring in a guy like DeAndre Hopkins would arguably be the best, if not second best, wide receiver that he's ever played with. And I mean, it would certainly free up everyone else on that team. That's what bringing in a guy like this does. It makes everyone else on your team better. And at 30 years old, they're not going to have to pay him a ton of money because he's already being paid by the Arizona Cardinals. And you can be a short-term team-friendly contract in which you pay him $8, $10, $12 million a year, which is still high for a receiver, but supplemented by another team paying him and give him a chance to win a Super Bowl. I can't see what would be wrong on either side for a deal like that. It would just suck to play against them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
to suck to play against, to say the very least, because you have a Kansas City Chiefs team that now played without that Tyreek Hill type player, and that offense, you could argue, is it maybe better without Tyreek Hill because of the way Patrick Mahomes was still slinging it last season? Like, won the MVP again. And you get a guy like a DeAndre Hopkins in there, that level of talent, that level of respect too. I think you talk about a locker room that he would seamlessly fit into. I think DeAndre Hopkins in the Kansas City Chiefs locker room, I think those guys know how much of a baller he is. They faced him in the playoffs before. They know the type of talent he is. They know, like Rick mentioned it. They know, I think, the type of dog that DeAndre Hopkins has in him. I think it could be a fit. Rick, are the Chiefs number one on your list here?
Yes, they are. And I'll give you a nice little parallel here for you just to ruminate on here. Justin, who would you say are the top two receivers in the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver room right now?
Right now?
Yeah.
Man, I don't even know.
Marcus Valdes-Scantling, maybe?
Yeah, and
MVS and Sky Moore or Kadarius Toney, probably? Yeah. Okay. So, in 2006, the New England Patriots made the AFC Championship game, and their top two wide receivers were Troy Brown and Jabbar Gaffney. The next year, they made the Super Bowl. What was their one big acquisition? Randy Moss. Now, I'm not putting them on the same tier, but I think you can argue that a move like this would have a similar effect on an already stacked Kansas City Chiefs team and gives the greatest quarterback of this generation of football fans his best wide receiver, pure wide receiver, to throw the ball to. I think you could say that there's similar vibes there. And I think this is a phenomenal fit. And you know what? The personalities mesh perfectly. Pat Mahomes is the easygoing guy. Travis Kelce is the ridiculous, balls out guy like crazy. And DeAndre Hopkins will fit in super smooth there too. Now, the one thing that I think might hold this back a little bit, and it might not, but it might, you never know. We have to see how this Kansas City Chiefs offense runs now that Eric Bieniemy is gone. Is it still Andy Reid's offense? Was it always Andy Reid's offense? Or now that Matt Nagy's back in the fold, actually, no, scrap that. It's not number 3. Matt Nagy's the offensive coordinator. Scrap it. Forget it. Who cares? No, in all seriousness, though, this is the best fit. If they can make the money work, this is the best fit. This is the right guy, the right scenario. And I think you put DeAndre Hopkins week 1, Thursday night, opening night with Mahomes and Kelce against that Lions team, it's going to make that game so much better. Much more fun.
Poor Detroit.
Poor Detroit. Hey, you know what, Detroit? You're the favorite in the AFC North. Stop them. There you go.
Man. Imagine first game of the season, your defense that struggled last year. It's like, all right, guys, we're going to come back this season. We're going to play harder. All right, who do we got week 1? Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, and Patrick Mahomes. Damn it.
We give up.
Damn it.
Yep.
I think a defensive coordinator might have stomach virus that week.
Can we take a bye this week, please? Okay, thanks.
Can we just give them the win and just give them the stats?
Unscheduled bye. Thank you very much.
Oh, my God, Lord above. But in all seriousness, no, I'm with you guys. I think me personally, if I was filling out a ranking, I'm pretty similar to Rick right now. I think this would be my number 1. And for DeAndre Hopkins, I think if you look at the wide receivers that when he was at the peak of his powers that DeAndre Hopkins was up there with, it was Julio Jones. It was Odell Beckham Jr., it was Antonio Brown, and I think Julio being the exception, you look at some of the wide receivers that DeAndre Hopkins has played in the same time frame as, pretty good players. Maybe you could say you would take D-Hop over some of those guys. Antonio Brown, Odell, Mike Evans have all won Super Bowl rings. And look, I think DeAndre Hopkins' talent itself speaks to it, where you would still pick him over a lot of guys, ring or no ring. But I think a ring would do something to that resume, to do something to that legacy, to where maybe he won't make it first ballot, because God knows how difficult it is to make first ballot for the NFL Hall of Fame, for the Football Hall of Fame. But to give you a really damn good shot, a Super Bowl would be up there. And also giving you a Super Bowl over some of the guys who are in there who have not won a Super Bowl as well. And still a contributor. Because like you said, Rick, I don't think DeAndre Hopkins wants to go somewhere and just be the fourth guy who gets 600 yards in the season and wins the Super Bowl. I think he would want to go somewhere, contribute 1K yards, contribute his catches, his touchdowns, and make the Super Bowl and win it. I think the Kansas City Chiefs right now, I don't know, man. If I had this year's Madden EA Sports game, I would just put DeAndre Hopkins on the Chiefs or force the trade to him and just see how that goes. But that would be if it was actually a well-programmed game, which we know it never is. Anyway, moving on from that. The second to last club here, a team that's already made a number of acquisitions at wide receiver this offseason. But, I mean, can you really say no to another? No, they really can't. The Baltimore Ravens in this case, and, of course, Lamar Jackson. Now, let's set up this scenario just like we have the rest. Offensive side of the ball, you have Lamar Jackson, one of the top 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks in the league. Definitely a top quarter of the league quarterback, I would say. That's a tough sentence. But up there in league circles, I think we could all agree. Justin's MVP pick before last season. Lamar Jackson. Good running back room, so it's a balanced offense, relatively speaking, if those guys are actually healthy, which is a big if because it feels like death taxes in a Baltimore Ravens running back gets injured every goddamn year over the last 3-4 years. But you got a balanced running game. You have a wide receiver room that is welcoming in a good chunk of new talent. You used a first-round pick on a receiver in this past draft. You signed Odell Beckham Jr. You have Rashad Bateman, who you hope can break out in year 3. I'm not holding my breath on that one, respectfully. Duvernay, I believe, is there as well. You have guys there, but again, situation where DeAndre Hopkins probably does end up finding himself as the definitive number 1 guy in that wide receiver room. And a pretty good tight end as well there in Mark Andrews. Solid offensive line. You look at the defensive side of the ball, pretty good defense. You have names all over that defense. A linebacking core that has a Roquan Smith, that has a Patrick Queen at the moment, that has a good defensive back core there in Baltimore that they've built over the last couple seasons with a number 1 corner in a Marlon Humphrey, with a player, Kyle Hamilton, as the young safety back there, a good one of Marcus Williams. Really well-constructed team is Baltimore. And a stable coach there in John Harbaugh. I stress stable. Not going to go on great, but I'll say stable at the very least, and good coach there in John Harbaugh. But kind of a similar situation you were talking about, Rick. Baltimore is going to have to reinvent themselves offensively as well this upcoming season because they did fire Greg Roman because finally people realized that offense, just as it was figured out in San Fran, it got figured out here. Probably already figured out, but Lamar Jackson still somehow made it work because he's just that talented. So what are we thinking here? Because you got the definitive rankings. If the Chiefs are your number 1, we know the Eagles and Bills are your 4 and 5. What are we looking at here for the Ravens in that ranking?
Well, it's interesting because there is a guy you didn't mention who might give you a window into how DeAndre Hopkins is as a teammate. That's Andy Isabella, is also on the Ravens too. So, and I remember he lost the was it Rashawn Moore, I think, or someone like that. I think the name was Rondale Moore. Thank you, Rashawn Moore. I was going to say Etwan, but no, he played for Purdue. Yeah, different guy.
And also basketball.
Different sport. I put this as number 3, and my reasoning for number 3 is because I think that as much as Baltimore added, there is so much confusion in that wide receiver room that I hope they can figure out what to do with it, because they've got a lot of veterans that are there, but a lot of younger guys too. And Todd Monken's the new OC, so we'll see how that fares. But I think there's too much traffic in that room for DeAndre Hopkins to really stand out and make his name for himself. Because, Odell Beckham's signing was a big thing because they celebrated it so mightily in Baltimore, They drafted Zay Flowers, and that was huge. And now you have Bateman back, and now you have Duvernay back, and you still have Mark Andrews. And it's just like there's so many voices that are there, and there's so many different weapons that are already there that it does create a bit of a luxury. And there's that specter hanging over you. If you go to Baltimore, you might get hurt. So I don't know if this is exactly the safest place for DeAndre Hopkins to go to.
Watch them ankles and knees, D-Hop.
No, yeah, watch everything. Watch your ACLs and your UCLs. Oh, goodness. I think, it would be a nice fit for Baltimore, but it's not something that I think they can take on right now because you don't know the health status and you want to make sure that all you guys are in place. I'll tell you what, if this was next year and the Ravens were coming off of a better season because everyone stayed healthy, I'd say, yeah, they can make a stab for it. But there's too much uncertainty right now with the weapons that they have and even the quarterback for me to say, go get DeAndre Hopkins. It's not a certainty. It's not if John Harbaugh's stable, but by no means are the Ravens on stable ground based upon their health and wellness. So I think for me, it's middle of the road for them.
Right. Makes sense. And also, one guy we forgot to mention in that locker room, in that wide receiver room, boys. How dare we? Nelson Aguilar. So
well, we mentioned him not for a reason because terrible.
Justin, what are your thoughts on D-Hop going to the Ravens?
I think it would be huge for the Ravens. I mean, it's something that we've always complained about with that team is that they never, ever, ever got Lamar true weapons. I mean, Mark Andrews has been good, but he's still just a tight end. You know what I mean? There's only so much that you can do, especially when you need them to block because you're running the ball more than every other team in the league. Obviously, it would be important that J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards stay healthy. They will need help at running back and all the other positions. But if they went out and this season and draft Zay Flowers and sign Odell Beckham Jr. and DeAndre Hopkins, this puts everything on Lamar. You've paid him. You've gotten him the weapons. The offensive line is there. You need to stay healthy. You need to prove that you are who you say you are. This is it. We're going to win a Super Bowl this year. Our secondary is only going to get better. We were young last year. It'll improve. We lost Calais Campbell. I'm sure that they have some contingency plans to be a top run defense again, as they are every season. Now is the time. Prove to me you are the team that beat Cincinnati early in the season last year. You're the team that started off with an MVP candidate last year. You are the team that has a former MVP in Lamar Jackson. Let's win some playoff games. Let's win some regular season games. Let's stay healthy. This is the move they need. This, out of every team you've mentioned, this is the true team that absolutely needs a signing like this more than any other team that you've said.
Right.
Kansas City can use a wide receiver,
right. But they don't need a
Super Bowl. And they should be the favorites to come out of the AFC again. The Ravens need this.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I'm right with you. I think of all the teams we said, even the last team that we're going to mention here, I think this is the team that definitely has a need because, while in Kansas City, yes, there's no definitive number one wide receiver. Like you said, there's the fact they just won. There's the fact that Travis Kelce's there. And look, Mark Andrews is good, but he ain't Travis Kelce. He's just not.
Let's also just talk about, like, as much as I just talked up all the signings they made at receiver, Odell's coming off his second torn ACL. Zay Flowers has done nothing in the NFL before.
Well, he's a rookie, to be fair. He's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not his fault, but you need to show us it. Now, DeAndre Hopkins would be the proven guy that they brought in for the first time.
And the bona fide, yes, I know we talked about it with Kansas City, but this is regardless of who else is there in terms of all skill position talent. The only offensive pieces on that Ravens team that would be better and more valuable than D-Hop would be the quarterback and probably the left tackle, Ronnie Stanley. Hopkins would be third definitively on that list. And he'd be number one in that room. He's number one in that skill position room. This is the spot where he would be that dude. And I don't know the Ravens cap situation off the top of my head. If they're in a good cap spot, maybe would they be the one team willing to give him the multi-year deal now would be the question. Because again, I'm talking about the idea of maybe it's just a 1-year deal for D-Hop this year. Obviously, he would like to seek out a multi-year deal if he could, but I think this late into the offseason with a lot of teams pretty close to set with their rosters, with their cap, it's unlikely to be a case. Whether it is or is not remains to be seen, but I think I'm with you. DeAndre Hopkins to the Baltimore Ravens would be the combination of everything we talked about. It's a good team. It's a quarterback that you said you wanted to, you would like throwing you the ball. So if you're having troubles in week 5, my brother in Christ, DeAndre, you asked for this, but you have a pretty good quarterback there, pretty good situation, pretty good team, successful. They've made the playoffs consistently. They got what you want. You'd be the number one guy. You would be the guy there. And that honestly, that would also be your wide receiver room to lead definitively because Odell's a veteran and he has career as well, but the last couple seasons, like you mentioned, still coming off the injury, he didn't play all of last year, and you have unproven young guys there, whether they be rookies or second, third, or fourth year players who just haven't had enough time in this league to show what they really and truly are. That's kind of what the case is. That's kind of what the case is in this situation. So that was number 4. Rick has it number 3 in his list. Justin, I assume that would be your 1 or 2 when it comes to the Ravens. So let's see where this final team ranks. He said the last quarterback he said, Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, Justin, throwing it to you first. So you're talking about Justin Herbert. Obviously, the Chargers quarterback set. All these teams have quarterback set. You got the quarterback there. Austin Eckler has agreed to return to the Chargers now that he got some incentives put in place in his contract, so he's back in the fold. So you got the running game set. A wide receiver room that has Mike Williams, that has Keenan Allen. So you got guys, although granted, I mean, if Rick was making the joke / comment about the potential of injuries in Baltimore, it kind of feels like one of those guys gets hurt every other season as well. So there's that. You have a solid offensive line. It's not elite, but Rashawn Slater hopefully is back in the fold for a full season. Get things together. A solid defense. There's some names there. They had their moments last season, but they also gave up 4 touchdowns? 30 points or something like that, or close to it in the second half of that playoff game. So, but still a relatively good defense. Still have some talent there. Derwin James, you got Joey Bosa there, Khalil Mack still. You got some relatively talented team, J.C. Jackson. Overall, and they played a lot last year without J.C. Jackson as well. Hope that free agency signing ends up working out for you, Los Angeles. What do you make of Hopkins to the Chargers? Where do you, on the tipping scale that we've talked about, Justin, so we kind of have, obviously, all these teams would love Hopkins. So that aside, we have on one side of the scale kind of what we talked about, the teams that would be closer to actually maybe needing him, with Baltimore definitively being there. And Kansas City, while not necessarily a dire need, would still like a guy like that being the definitive one. Then you go to the wide receiver. Then we go to the other side of that spectrum of what we talked about. You got the Eagles and the Bills. Obviously, yes, he would be an ad, but this, that, and the third. Where do the Chargers lie on that spectrum? Are they the healthy medium here potentially, or do you see them leaning one way or another?
So, to me, one of the biggest question marks of the offseason is what is going on with that wide receiver room. I know they drafted Quentin Johnston, who I love, by the way. But what is going on with 31-year-old Keenan Allen and 28-year-old Mike Williams? They expect Keenan Allen to be healthy going into training camp. They have not said a word about Mike Williams. They don't know when he's coming back. Which of these guys is going to stay healthy this year? Which of these guys is going to be the guy to help Justin Herbert finally have some real production late in the year? I mean, I know they finally made the playoffs last year. They were an embarrassing first round out. They need to get that offense going. And I understand a lot of people think it has to do with coaching, but their wide receiver room is supposed to be very good and is somehow a question mark. So it's something that would help bring some stability to that team, I think, and some veteran leadership in a room that might be missing it. Because outside of those two guys, they are very young, by the way. They're deep. They have a lot of guys that we think can play, but we haven't seen a ton of production. So I think it would be a good move for them. I don't know if that's something they do, because, again, they do have a lot of guys there. That being said, he would, again, immediately be the number one guy there. And it does allow them to make some moves if they are unsure of some of those names.
Yeah, and the unsureness is something big that you bring up, because Mike Williams, they've even said they haven't seen him in OTAs still from that Week 18 back injury, which, good Lord, it's looking worse and worse for the decision for Brandon Staley to play those guys in that game. It continues to not look great. You have Keenan Allen there, who I think, relatively speaking, is fine. But again, he does have a history of having rough injuries in his career. I think he's suffered 2 season-ending injuries in his time as a Charger. I think one of them even when they were still in San Diego. So thanks for that, Spanos. But rough times, to say the very least. Like, it's not easy. Rick, I was saying this while you were out, that, you make the joke with Baltimore, but I think even LA, we could say the same thing, that that wide receiver room gets hurt. And maybe D-Hop, I was kind of making the idea of, on one side of the spectrum, what we talked about, you got the Chiefs and the Ravens. On the other side of it, you got the Eagles and the Bills, what we talked about so far. I think this is the healthy medium here. But of course, as we know from your rankings, to this point, ipso facto, the Chargers are your number 2. So talk about it.
So it's a similar thing to what Justin was saying about Baltimore needs the signing. I think the Chargers need the signing simply because of the fact that this is the last gasp for Brandon Staley, and this would be, I think, the last gasp for Justin Herbert. And I think this would be zero fault. If they can't win with Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and a plethora of wide receivers. Do you guys mention Quentin Johnston in any way? Because he's also there too. So, but also it kind of validates in a way the bringing on of Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. Because I think that in Kellen Moore's offenses, you have a steady wide receiver who can go in there and continue to play no matter what. And the Cowboys have had that for consistent years where if it wasn't CeeDee Lamb, years ago it was Miles Austin who stepped into the fold and kind of made a name for himself. So it gives them another chance to have another number one guy. And in reality, you're right. We don't know what Mike Williams is, but this would be a chance for him to kind of, not have to rush back so quickly, because that would be a terrifying four if Mike Williams is your third wide receiver. You put D-Hop as your one, make Keenan Allen your two, then you have Williams and Johnston. You have zero excuse to not challenge the Chiefs for the AFC West crown and not make a statement that you are the new kings of the West, if you can make this happen. Because arguably speaking, if Hopkins goes to the Chargers, that makes that wide receiver room run circles out of any wide receiver room in the AFC West. And again, there's no excuse for it now. If you can't win with that offense, I don't care how many injuries you have, because you know what? Injuries happened last year because Brandon Staley was such a dunce. Now, if the injuries happen again, it's 2 years in a row, and what happened with Brandon Staley, an idiot again? Well, get him out and put somebody in there who knows how to coach this team. Go to Thailand, call Cliff Kingsbury, and then hang up the phone as a prank call. But get somebody else who you want in there to be a better coach than what Brandon Staley has been. That's what I think. I mean, that's why they're my number two. I get why Justin's saying the Baltimore's, it's a great fit for them. It's similar vibes to the Chargers. Both of these teams desperately need a signing like this to bring them back to somewhat of relevancy. And the quarterbacks can only do so much. So if you get a wide receiver in that room too, it helps out a lot. But I still think that this is a little bit higher than Baltimore because this is a zero option. Like, you have to bring him in and you have to get him the ball. Otherwise, it ain't going to work.
Right. And this would be, you mentioned Brendan Staley, but also probably would be the last big one for Tom Telesco as well, who's time with the Chargers. It's been interesting. This is his third head coach, I want to say. To be fair, I think he inherited Mike McCoy, so technically his second head coaching hire. But, you only get so many bullets as a general manager. And Tom Telesco, this is another one for him here. So Rick bringing up that point. So those are the 5 teams that we have here that we immediately listed. But that doesn't necessarily mean, those aren't the only 5 teams he could go to. There is maybe another team or two that will probably, I'm sure many teams are going to call him. Justin, is there a dark horse team? As we mentioned, those are the 5 teams we went through. We went through the Bills, we went through the Eagles, we went through the Chiefs, Ravens, and Chargers. All 5 of those teams, what our thoughts are, relatively speaking. I think for the most part, we all agree it's the last 3 that we discussed are probably the most likely interest in that group of 5. But dark horses win sometimes. So, Justin, do you have a immediate dark horse that you think could get a meeting and could coerce Hopkins? I make it sound like as if they're trying to convince him.
Like you said, every team should pick up that phone. There are specifically 2 quarterbacks that I thought maybe should have been included in this list. But I don't even, there's a lot of teams that I'm sitting here that I'm thinking of that really, really could use him. I'm surprised he didn't say Joe Burrow, but I understand why he wouldn't want to go there because of the crowded nature of that wide receiver room already.
Yeah.
How about Jacksonville?
Ooh.
And Trevor Lawrence, I mean, as good as Christian Kirk was last year.
Yeah. You get Hopkins.
Could probably use a guy like Hopkins. I mean, to come in, they would immediately have an answer, even though Zay Jones also played very well last year coming down the stretch.
And you have Ridley coming back in the fold.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about Ridley. So, again, that's another crowded one. So then, all right, the other 2 teams that I had in mind are Carolina and Chicago.
Ooh.
I thought would both be excellent fits as well. Chicago, I know already they do have a crowded receiver room, but he comes in, he's immediately the number 1 there. And it would be interesting to see what Justin Fields could do for or DeAndre Hopkins could do for a quarterback like Justin Fields, who hasn't necessarily been known as a great passer, but, could certainly help out. And Carolina, again, They've done everything. The only thing that I really haven't loved, although I do think they improved, was their wide receiver room. So to bring in a true number one in their prime to help a young quarterback like Bryce Young, they would maybe be a playoff team this year.
Yeah, they certainly, if an NFC South team were to somehow finagle their way into getting DeAndre Hopkins, that would be big. But he wants to try to go to good organizations, so I don't know. But I mean, maybe the Panthers can sneak in there. You never know.
Yeah.
Rick, what do you think? We're talking about dark horses here. Dark horse team that you think would have a relatively good chance at maybe being able to swipe DeAndre Hopkins away from the main five we've mentioned.
And I got Carolina was the last one mentioned. Were there any others that were mentioned?
Chicago and Jacksonville.
I mean, I'd love DeAndre Hopkins on my Bears, absolutely. Jacksonville's a good shout too. I think that the number one seed goes here both ways, because I think Kansas City would love to have DeAndre Hopkins. So would Detroit. Ooh. Detroit would love to have DeAndre Hopkins there, because that gives them, along with Amon-Ra St. Brown, an opportunity to go away from Jameson Williams, because he's out for the first 6 games because of the gambling.
Yeah,
that's an immediate person to replace, and it validates in a way Jared Goff in a sense. And again, you know me, I'm a big Jared Goff stan, but I think this would be huge for Detroit. It's just, again, you want to be the top team in the NFC North, you got to prove it. Here's the way to prove it. DeAndre Hopkins on a silver platter, the best wide receiver Detroit has had in their arsenal since Calvin Johnson.
Yep, very easily so.
Very easily,
to say the least. What do we think? Because the team that immediately popped in my mind, and you talk about they made the playoffs last year, big market, maybe could get a contract out of them. New York Giants, they need a definitive. That's a team that needs a definitive number one wide receiver. And if we're talking about, and look, I've been on this. I said this during the quarterback rankings. I think this is going to be I don't want to say make or break season in terms of his job, but this is going to be a make or break year for the Dayball Jones experiment of, can you now go 2 years in a row of being able to hide Daniel Jones away from other teams the way you ran the offense last year? And the way that you can help out Daniel Jones and maybe make it look like he's better than just 15 touchdowns and 5 interceptions is adding a number one wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins.
But here's my one question with that, my one issue, the problem that I'm thinking. If you add DeAndre Hopkins, does that mean you have to say goodbye to Saquon Barkley? Because if the money doesn't, and then if you have to say goodbye to Barkley, you have a hole in the running back room. And I don't know if there's any good running backs that are able to come out this year. So you're playing with fire there if you're the Giants. If you can find a way to restructure to get both of them, great. But I don't think it's going to work, because, again, there's that big glaring hole of what are we going to do with Saquon Barkley here? And I feel like that would be more the way the Giants would go, is they would kind of keep that bell cow, that star running back, instead of trying to get a 31-year-old wide receiver who might be in here for a year or two, because then the numbers just don't add up. I don't think that would work in Joe Shane's system.
Yeah. It's a damn shame. Giants. If only you didn't pay a mediocre quarterback $45 million. Anyways, moving on from that, I think that's all in all for the talk on DeAndre Hopkins. But before we really close things out and get to the main event of the show, which has, if you're new to the podcast, first off, what an episode you're being introduced to.
Seriously.
To us on. But before we continue on, I mentioned it towards the top. DeAndre Hopkins was a guy that was rumored to be traded much earlier in the offseason. Not a full-blown discussion, boys, but let's slightly come back to some of the names that were rumored for heavy parts of the late free agency period and now during the draft. DeAndre Hopkins being a big name that was moved. Is there any other big name that you guys could conceivably see being moved from their team, whether by hook or by crook, whether it be by trade or we potentially see them? I mean, I wouldn't think that teams would cut their guy, but who knows? Because Hopkins, of course, has been cut. Austin Eckler, I mentioned this moments ago. He was given incentives on his contract now that enticed him to stay and finally report to the Chargers. So those are two of the bigger names that were being rumored earlier in the offseason to potentially be moved. Now, one is staying put and one we know is going to be moved, but he didn't get traded. He got cut and will sign somewhere. Are any, and I know this would require a little bit of time here, but are any of the names that we mentioned earlier this offseason, boys, do you think that now as we get closer to the start of full-blown training camp, are we not going to see any movement from some of the guys that we talked about earlier in the offseason?
Well, I think there's two big names in my mind that are still in play here to be moved. And we mentioned one, we mentioned Budda Baker. I think the first part of the offseason is going to be, where is Budda Baker going to go? Because he's not staying in Arizona. He's going to be moved. And if he stays in Arizona, he might sit out a year, because I don't think he wants to play for this team anymore. I think he wants to go to a team that he knows he can win with. So maybe that might be a midseason deadline trade to see where the chips fall. I think Dalvin Cook is still there. I think Dalvin Cook is still a marketable option for a lot of teams who are looking for a change of pace running back here. And I think you have to look at the rooms that these teams have and try and understand, where the running back room stands and where it would stand if you added a guy like Cook. I think, injuries are a concern for him, I believe, but at the same time, he's still got enough electricity to really change an offense around. And let's face facts. I think even Dalvin Cook knows that the Vikings are a fraud. So I think that's why he wants to leave there too. I mean, I don't know. I think Justin would enjoy Dalvin Cook on the Jets if that was a possibility over, the running back room that's currently there. I mean, obviously, the guys that are there who are great, but, it could be an upgrade there. I think Dalvin Cook and Tony Pollard make an excellent 1-2 punch in Dallas. That if the money works and they can make it happen, that could be something that could be interesting as well. But I think we're in that kind of mold right now where those are your two main guys. Maybe if you want to talk about Trey Lance still, but I think those rumors are dying. I think he's sticking in San Francisco, at least for now. But he will be an active player come midseason if there's a team that needs a quarterback that has quarterbacks get hurt. He might find his way to a team like Miami if, Skylar Thompson ain't the answer and Tua's hurt again. So I guess we'll see.
Mike White.
Yeah, I mean, Mike White too, but, you got to add some diversity in there as well. So,
oh, man. Justin, whether it be any of the guys Rick has stated or any guy maybe you could think of that we haven't brought up, is there anyone you think that could get traded by the time training camp starts?
It's another one that rumors have died down, but T. Higgins could possibly get.
Yeah.
Again, they're going to have to pay him if they're going to choose between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and they can only sign two. T. Higgins is going to be the guy that gets out of there. I can also see possibly Joe Mixon getting moved as well, just because I believe he's got a fairly decent cap number, and he was not extremely productive last year outside of a couple of games. So obviously they need to fix their offensive line. That should be the preeminent factor. I believe they cut Lyle Collins, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he's still there.
Is he?
When I check his name, it still shows he's a Cincinnati Bengal. So.
Did he ask for a trade? Is that what it was? Because they signed Orlando Brown, right?
They did sign Orlando Brown. No, it was Jonah Williams asked for the trade.
And they're going to move Lyle Collins to the right?
I guess so.
Either way, they need to fix that offensive line. That'll be a priority, even if it costs them a lot of money. And they will look to cut on certain positions.
Yeah.
T. Higgins as a number 2 and Joe Mixon as a older running back now might see their way out of there.
Yeah, fair. Very fair to say the least. And of course, even though I don't think these guys are going to trade before the season, we kind of talked about this team in earlier parts. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think, will be more of a trade deadline team in regards to, you talk about Devin White, who's requested a deal out of there. And if they are bad enough, could we see a little bit of a break apart of that team in terms of at least Chris Godwin wanting out? I think Mike Evans is probably going to finish his career as a Buccaneer. I don't think there's any reason for him to go anywhere else, but Chris Godwin, still relatively young, could find himself out of Tampa Bay. Could go to a pretty good team, to say the very least.
I don't know about Mike Evans. You don't see guys doing that anymore.
No.
I just think he's won the Super Bowl there. He's been through all the years. Like, what's the point of him moving?
He'll retire as a Buck, maybe. He'll go into the Hall of Fame as a Buck. But you're telling me you couldn't see him playing 2 years somewhere else?
I mean, I think ultimately, if we're talking about a trade, now I think if he hits free agency again, which I don't know how many years are left on his deal to say that, I think if you're talking about a trade, I think it would be the case where the Buccaneers organization would ask him, like, hey, we're going to leave this up to you. Do you want to stay here or do you want to go? I think that's what it would do. Because again, I'm not saying he shouldn't want to win, but I've seen plenty of guys kind of be like, yeah, I got my Super Bowl. If he doesn't own all of the wide receiver records in that franchise, he's probably number 2. So he could probably stand to break those, but I'm pretty sure he owns them. I want to say he owns probably a good chunk of them. Like, just finish out your career there. But again, fair point. Not everyone stays on a team. If Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers leave the Patriots and the Packers, and if Wayne Gretzky can get traded and all that stuff, then damn near anyone can leave at this point.
He is a free agent after this year. So this would be the year to move him.
Well, I mean, guys, Baker Mayfield's there. You don't think they're going to make the playoffs with Baker Mayfield? Probably not. Anyways, that being said, that ends all the talk about NFL players in this one. As old 70s Rick, as old Sonny Rosetto there takes a nice gander through the glasses at us. That finishes the football talk. Let's end things with the chaos. Let's end things with what I always say is my favorite segment of the show, honestly. And I think for the most part, if for anyone that's watched this show consistently, first off, why? But we thank you. Let's go to Rant and Rick's Rostrum Podium. What do we got this week?
We're going to start with number 3, and it's about a third of his name, who has decided that he wants to take up a sport that he's kicking himself out of. And that is on June 11th in Florida, Floyd Money Mayweather is returning to the boxing ring. Why? I don't know. But guess who he's fighting? John Gotti III. Why? A, Floyd, why are you doing this fight? You have more money than God at this point. And number 2, John Gotti III. What's this? You want to take a whack at Floyd Mayweather? You want to put a hit out on him in front of 20,000 people? Like, come on now. Like, boxing's starting to lose its luster, and this is the reason why. Because you have guys like Jake Paul and KSI fighting, and then Floyd Mayweather, he doesn't know when to retire. He doesn't know when to leave. It's bad. And Stephen A is going to text Floyd Mayweather saying, this guy on the podcast says you can't fight anymore. So guess what? Next June, me versus Floyd Mayweather. Let's have it. In my 80s cosplay, instead of my 70s cosplay. I can't get this all dirty. Come on now. Number 2. Go ahead, Jerg. What do you want to say?
We already know you're fighting Adam Rank. That fight has already been signed.
Hey. We're buds.
I don't know about that.
Once this year ends, though, if the Bears don't do well, then I will put the smackdown on him. Absolutely. Number 2.
Fair weather fan.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But
Number
only
2.
for bad teams, apparently.
Of course, have to be. I got to give the teams hope. Number 2. I want to take y'all to Texas, to this high school in Texas outside of Waco. It's called Marlin High School. They were supposed to have their graduation this year, actually, pretty recently. They're a very small school, so their graduating class was 33, which, if you're in a small town, you don't have a lot of people there, I guess it's fine, whatever. Let's talk about the failing American education system, though. They postponed this graduation? You want to know why? 28 students failed to meet the requirements, so they were going to have a class of 5 graduating. They failed to meet attendance or grade requirements. Now, grade requirement I get. If you're not very good at school, you're not going to have good grades, fine. But attendance? That means 28 people decided not to show up more than the times necessary to, just not get their cap and gown. This is the future of America right here. Great people in Marlin, Texas. Love it. Number 1, the Under-20 World Cup is currently going on right now in Argentina, and it's the 2023 Under-20 World Cup for the men's side. The United States is in it. They have qualified into the knockout stages. However, the way they did it, I think if you're an Under-20 fan or a World Cup soccer fan, you got to be very upset about the way they qualified. Because while, yes, they did win all of their games, which is, an accomplishment in of itself, they only won their games by scores of 1-0, 3-0, and 2-0. They beat Ecuador 1-0. Ecuador has 11 goals scored, which is the most in this tournament. So that's how you know Ecuador is doing better than the United States in this tournament. They beat Slovakia 2-0, which I didn't know Slovakia still had a soccer team. I thought they were, off the map or whatever. But the real kicker, guess who else was in their group that they beat 3-0? Fiji. You couldn't beat Fiji by more than 5 goals in a tournament where, by the way, currently Uzbekistan and the Gambia have also qualified to the knockout stages. You should be dominating here. If you're saying this is going to be our sport, you should be dominating your opponents and not cakewalking through a second half. By the way, that Fiji game, they didn't score a goal till the 61st minute. It's a 90-minute game. So what were we doing for that full first hour? Watching a Marvel movie because it's trash? eating a Dunkin' Donut because you know they suck too? Like, what are you doing? Like, come on now. People, come on. United States Soccer, do better. Raise these kids to be world beaters, not minnows in a competition where they're not going to make it out against New Zealand or Italy, because that's what they face next. And you know what? They ain't going to make it out of that round because Italy is probably going to beat them. And New Zealand might as well beat them too because just not good. You're just not good. Like Duncan, you're just not good. Duncan, by the way, had missed several weeks of me ranting about them, so they thought they were safe. But no one's safe from Sonny Rosetto. That's how we do it.
How's Belgium doing in the Under-20 World Cup? Are they in it?
No, they're not in it.
Damn it.
They have avoided the drama. Uzbekistan is in the knockout stage. Guatemala was eliminated. And Gambia, by the way, has a 2-1 win over France, which is embarrassing for the state of French soccer.
That's rough.
Yeah. It's brutal.
Rough
Back in 1971, Gambia wasn't even a real country. Actually, I don't know if that's true or not. But
I was going to say.
That sounds right.
All right. Well, as Rick, hold on. Here's the real reason why Rick is going through the Under-20 World Cup and why he mentioned it. Because we damn well know after he finishes his business here with Azerbaijan, and Belgium is on the back burner apparently, he's friends with Wales. He's got to find his next country, and the Under-20 World Cup is one of the breeding grounds for Rick finding the next country he's going to start his beef with.
By the way, Gambia, independence 1965, but full independence 1989. So I was right.
Oh, Lord above. All right. Well, ladies
go,
and gentlemen,
Gambia. Go away.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us to this alleged football podcast. But thank you for joining us here on the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. As the episode title said, it's frickin' May. What are we going to talk about over the next, I think month worth of episodes before we start the division breakdowns, boys? We haven't done the math on that yet, necessarily speaking, but we will figure it out eventually. What are we going to talk about the next month or so? Who the hell knows? But please join us for the ride. We have 70s dressed out Rick. I think 80s, 90s, and 2000s are on the way. I just want to see Rick dressed as a 2010s kid here 4 weeks from now. That I can't wait to see.
What is that going to be, a Fortnite backpack? Come on now.
Yes, that is the selling point for next. It's a Fortnite backpack, a Minecraft hat, and just a shirt that says, on a scale of 1 to even, you could not even. You just got to go full 2010s there.
Well, I'll floss on camera too. How's that sound?
That should be a punishment for next season if you go 0-4 for a week. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. What we'll talk about, we're going to have some fun over the next month or so. Again, please join us as we slowly make our way through the dog days of summer, but we will come out fresh, shiny, sunshine, happiness, and rainbows and all that, because football soon enough will return to us. But until then, appreciate you all coming along for the ride. We'll see you guys next week on the podcast that loves, as always, to deliver fun football, and this week in the 70s version, a little bit of chaos. Take care, and we'll see you all next week.